Society burglar strikes again. Series of burglaries. 6 over the period from June 2nd to June 17th. On July 2nd, the 7th occurred at the home of Sir Sanford Leeds. Cleopatra tiara stolen, it says. As in the other cases, no sign of extensive search by the thief, and only one piece of jewelry involved. Victims elsewhere at the time. Here's a complete list of the particulars, Holmes, if you'd care to read it.
I believe you'll find them in the study.
How do you do, gentlemen? I am Gerald Locke.
Please be seated, Mr. Locke. How can we be of service?
3 days ago, Guy Clarendon was found murdered at Halliday's. It's preposterous, but Miss Frances Nolan has been charged and is being detained at the criminal court, Old Bailey.
Frances Nolan. Ah, yes. Sister of Loretta Nolan. Only surviving heirs of Sir Malcolm Nolan, founder of the Aberdeen Navigation Company.
I seem to recall that Sir Malcolm and Lady Nolan were killed when some lunatic threw a bomb into their carriage. Seems to me that later I heard something about it being a case of mistaken identity. Wasn't one of their little offspring in the carriage with them at the time?
Yes, it was Loretta, Frances's sister. She was only 4. Miraculously, she was uninjured.
Mr. Locke, I've heard that you are a suitor for Miss Frances Nolan's hand, are you not?
Yes.
And was it not also true that she was being courted by Guy Clarendon?
Unfortunately, yes.
Have you any idea why Frances Nolan was charged with the crime?
Well, she was discovered over the body with a pistol in her hand.
That would do it.
But you don't understand. Frances is totally incapable of murder, not even of a scoundrel such as Guy Clarendon.
Scoundrel? But he's from such blue blood. Also, if I'm not mistaken, he's an accomplished batsman for the West London Cricketers, a ranked fencer in international competition.
He was also a bit of a bounder, Watson.
What an understatement. Guy Clarendon was excessively fond of cards and strong drink. His father had all but disinherited him. I tried to tell Frances that Clarendon was no good, but to no avail. And now look at the mess she's in. Will you help?
Most certainly.
This is a difficult thing for a man to say about his only son. But Guy was a wastrel and a ne'er-do-well. Only a short month or so ago, I gave him £5,000 and told him that was the last he'd see of my money. I'd hoped the shock would bring the boy around, make him realize he had to settle down, instead of wasting his life on gambling and gallivanting around with that wild woman.
Which wild woman was that?
Loretta Nolan, of course.
You mentioned gambling, Sir Francis. Have you any idea with whom he gambled or who might have wanted to kill him?
I wish I did. He told us nothing. He only came around when he needed money. And when I told him there'd be no more, we never saw him. Just about broke his mother's heart. There, Gertie. We still have one another.
I've something you ought to know about Master Guy. One morning, rather early, about 4 or 5 weeks ago, I heard a terrible clatter downstairs, so I came down to investigate. It was Master Guy just coming home. He was in a terrible state, all battered and bruised, with a fresh cut on his forehead. I asked him who did it to him, and he wouldn't say. I think he was afraid for his life.
Clarendon, poor chap. He arrived on the 29th day of May and was given a front room on the 3rd floor. 2 days later, he asked to be moved to suite 205.
To your knowledge, did he have any visitors?
Only 2 that I'm aware of. One was a most disagreeable fellow. He was rather large, had a thick walrus moustache, and a very prominent scar down his cheek. He arrived on the 1st of June, the very day of Mr. Clarendon's move. He simply came in, sat down in the lobby, and waited. 20 minutes or so later, Mr. Clarendon came down from his room. The big man yanked him aside. I was about to send for a bobby when Mr. Clarendon signed me that all was well. After a few minutes, they left together. I never saw the man again. His other visitor, who came by quite frequently, was a most striking woman. She was quite fashionably dressed. She had a most distinctive laugh, very full and deep. I've no idea who she was.
Please, tell us about the morning of July 2nd.
It was about 9 o'clock when a woman entered. She was rather plain-looking, and I wouldn't have noticed her, except for the fact that she came in the front door, looking neither left nor right, and proceeded directly up the staircase. It couldn't have been more than 30 seconds later when I heard a bang, followed by a woman's scream. I dashed upstairs to the 2nd floor. The door to room 205 was open. Inside, I found the body of Mr. Clarendon and the woman who'd just come up. She was lying in a swoon in the center of the room with a pistol in her hand. I revived her with some whiskey. When she came to, she was totally disoriented. She had no idea where she was or what she'd done. When she saw Clarendon's body, she let out a shriek and dropped the pistol. I summoned the police.
Tell me, at what hour are the hotel's front doors locked?
Oh, 10 o'clock, sir. Anyone who arrives after that has to be let in by the night staff. Of course, Mr. Clarendon was never one of those. He was always in his room before 10.
May we see his room? What have we here, Watson? Appears to be a bank statement.
Oh, look here, Holmes. Appears the maid missed a spot in her sweeping.
Good thing she did, Watson. You're staring at evidence.
Blood.
What's this stain here?
Smells like a fine sherry. Looks like someone's been celebrating.
The question is, was it with the body or over it?
Nothing much here. A couple of shirts and 3 pair of shoes.
But what you failed to notice, my dear Watson, is that one of the pairs of shoes is canvas and has been dyed black. Interesting. A sweater and trousers. An ensemble in black.
Not much of a view. All I can see is a brick wall of the building across the alley.
Ivy vines winding up a trellis.
I understand that Wilfred Robards is considering taking Miss Nolan's case. He might be able to help you. If you'd like, I can arrange an interview with Frances Nolan. She's being held downstairs, you know.
We might be able to help you, Miss Nolan, if you could just remember what happened that night in Mr. Clarendon's room.
Well, that's just the trouble. I can't remember anything except seeing Guy's body across the room and the pistol in my hand.
Where did you get the pistol?
I've no idea, though the police assure me it's mine. I didn't know Guy was at Halliday's. I've never even been there before. And why would I shoot him anyway? We loved each each other.
There, Miss Nolan. Stiff upper lip.
Thank you.
Miss Nolan, what is the last thing you remember before the room at Halliday's?
Oh, hot cocoa in bed.
I beg your pardon?
Well, every night before I retire, my maid, Grace, brings me a cup of hot cocoa.
How nice.
Oh, yes.
And before that?
Well, before that, I dine with Dr. Trevelyan, as I do every Sunday evening. My sister Loretta is under his care. The doctor and I have become good friends over the years. He left at 10 o'clock, as he always does.
May I ask, where did you first meet Guy Clarendon?
At the country estate of Cornelius Oldwine, in March. My sister Loretta was attending a party there. I suppose things got a bit out of hand because it seems she dived into a fountain. She caught pneumonia and I had to go and fetch her home. Guy was also at the estate, and that's where we met.
And he immediately began paying court to you?
Oh, heavens, no. Nobody seems to take much notice of me. I suppose that comes from having such a wildly attractive sister. That's why I was so surprised when he called a few weeks later. We began seeing a great deal of each other. We went on long carriage rides, had picnic lunches. It was all quite lovely. And then on the 5th of June, he declared his love for me and asked for my hand in marriage. I was so happy. I couldn't have killed him.
How do you explain your presence at Halliday's?
Well, I can't. It's just like the other 2 times.
You've had memory losses before.
Yes, twice in the past month. The first time I found myself atop a horse in Hyde Park, with no recollection of how I got there. The last thing I remember was having lunch with my sister Loretta. Then there I was, atop a chestnut mare.
How peculiar.
The funny thing is, I'm terrified of horses.
You mentioned there was a second time.
Yes, a few days later, I met with my solicitor, Hiram Davenport. Then the next thing I know, I'm at the Newgate Street station. I consulted my physician, Dr. Mason, and he was quite as baffled as I was.
One last question, if you will. What is your relationship with Gerald Locke?
Oh, Jerry, he's a dear old friend. Though I'm afraid we had a falling out of late. He said some very unkind words about Guy.
Sure, I remember Clarendon. He and his lady friend used to stop in here from time to time, usually on their way to Kilgore's gaming parlor or coming back from it. Rumor has it, Clarendon was into Kilgore for a sizable sum.
Do you happen to know how much?
£7,000 was the figure I heard. Got to the point Kilgore wouldn't allow him in the door. Clarendon made a big fuss till Gus Bullock stepped in. Clarendon backed down pretty quick. Don't blame him none. Nobody in their right mind would want to mess with the likes of Gus.
Do you think Bullock was involved in the murder?
Nothing you could tell me about that bloke would surprise me. Anyways, Kilgore makes it clear to Clarendon that he wants his money. Then, a month or so later, Clarendon comes in all smiles. And he and Kilgore getting on like chums. Figure Clarendon must have paid him back. Then Calvin Leach steps into the picture.
Now, who's Calvin Leach?
Leach deals in what you might call stolen property. Square dealer, too. Give you 1/2 the value of the article.
What does Leach have to do with Clarendon and Kilgore?
Usually nothing at all. But there it is. Leach, Kilgore, and Clarendon meeting late at night just as thick as thieves. The meetings continued on right up to, well, the night before Clarendon's death.
Very interesting.
Now, we've been standing here jawing, and I don't recall hearing anybody order nothing. What'll it be, mate?
Doctor, we understand that you dined with Frances Nolan on the evening of July 1st.
Yes, that is correct. We dine every Sunday. Her sister Loretta has been under my care for some 10 years. First at the Mesmer Braid Institute and then in private practice.
Without breaching physician-patient protocol, would you mind telling us the nature of her illness?
She never quite recovered from the overwhelming trauma of watching her parents being blown to bits.
I quite understand.
As is often the case with young orphans, they tend to create fantasies about their parents. Miss Loretta Nolan truly believes that her father was the King of England, making her a princess.
Do you think her unconventional behavior stems from that fantasy?
Absolutely. As a princess, she believes she can do no wrong. I must say that she's worlds apart from her sister Frances.
Do you know Frances Nolan well?
Yes, rather. Through my treatment of her sister, I've known her for years. Let me say that it is difficult to believe that Miss Frances is capable of murder. She has a quiet, unassuming personality. An act of such direct confrontation would not be at all in keeping with her character.
Were Loretta and Frances close?
I know without a doubt that Miss Frances loves and cares for her sister almost as a parent would a child. Miss Loretta, well, she loves her sister as much as she is capable of love.
Hear ye, hear ye. The Queen's Court stands in session. Mr. Holmes, I understand you've been looking into the murder of Guy Clarendon.
That is correct, my lord.
Would you be so kind as to tell the court who killed Mr. Clarendon? Please choose from either your notebook or directory, Mr. Holmes.
Certainly, my lord.
I see. And what was Loretta Nolan's motive for killing Clarendon? Ah, greed. Pure and simple. Now, have you determined why Frances Nolan went to Halliday's?
I have, my lord.
Please inform the court. Not a very sisterly thing to do at all. Is there anything else you wish to report to the court?
Yes, my lord. I believe we've also solved the case of the society burglar.
You don't say. Who is the guilty party?
Remember, we may choose from either the notebook or the directory.
I believe we are already aware of that, Watson.
Guy Clarendon was straight from the upper crust. Why ever did he turn to a life of crime? Congratulations, gentlemen. This was a difficult case.
On the contrary, my lord, it was elementary.
That's what you think. Nonetheless, the good people of London are forever in your debt. We thank you.
My pleasure, my lord. Well, Watson, we should be very pleased with ourselves on this one.
Yes, indeed, Holmes.
2 cases solved for Scotland Yard, though I doubt that Lestrade will consider himself in our debt. 2? Yes, indeed. First, the society burglar. Clarendon was £7,000 in debt to the gambler Kilgore. Unfortunately, he was in his father's bad graces and he was flat broke.
Do you suppose Kilgore sent Bullock around to rough Clarendon up?
Good deduction, Watson. You're learning. That's why he moved into Halliday's, to escape Gus Bullock.
And to pay off his debts, he took to burglary.
Right you are. He acquired a black sweater, trousers, and a pair of black canvas shoes so as not to be seen or heard in the dead of night. He chose victims of his own class, whose social comings and goings he knew well, and whose homes he'd visited often.
I still don't understand why, after he'd settled in at Halliday's, he changed rooms.
Elementary, my dear Watson. To be at the back of the hotel with a vine-covered trellis conveniently leading in and out of his bedroom window.
Quite so. Positively clever of you.
May I continue?
Oh, please do.
On the 1st of June, Bullock tracked Clarendon down and confronted him in the lobby. Clarendon paid him the £5,000 that was given to him by his father.
But he still owed Kilgore £2,000. And that was the same evening the society burglar struck for the first time.
So pleased you've been paying attention, Watson. Soon after that, Clarendon, Kilgore, and Calvin Leach, a known trafficker in stolen goods, were seen together. Notice, if you will, that 1/2 the value of the first 3 society burglaries is equal to £2,000. Half the value being the price normally paid by Calvin Leach for stolen goods. Notice also that this same amount is equal to the balance of Clarendon's debt to Kilgore.
Fascinating. So with his new vocation, Clarendon now had an easy source of income.
Quite so. as his succeeding bank transactions evidence. On the day after each of the next 3 burglaries, Clarendon made deposits. Everything went along swimmingly, and by June 30th, his debt was paid.
But the tiara was stolen July 1st.
Yes, Watson. Apparently, young Clarendon thought he'd found himself a new vocation. He might have lasted longer at it if he'd chosen something else to steal.
Whatever do you mean, Holmes?
Loretta Nolan's delusion that she was born of royal parentage proved to be his undoing.
If she took it, how did she manage? No one saw her enter or leave.
She came and went the same way Clarendon did, via the trellis. She was armed with a derringer purchased at Esgoff's in her sister's name. Clarendon returned from his night's work and poured 2 glasses of wine in celebration. That's when Loretta Nolan shot him and took the tiara.
How wicked of her.
Not nearly as wicked as what she did next.
What?
She went to her sister Frances's home and hypnotized her. She then proceeded to instruct her to go to Clarendon's room with the derringer and fire it into the ceiling.
Incriminate her own sister? But why?
If we could determine that precisely, we could start our own institute.
Sick mind, no doubt. But tell me, Holmes, how did Clarendon know the precise locations of each of his victims' jewels?
Excellent question, Watson. Although there is no clear-cut evidence for this, I can only assume that Loretta Nolan must have been in on it too. The only way Clarendon could have known the locations of the jewels was if the victims themselves had told him where to look. None of them recalls having told anyone, but in fact they did tell someone. Who? Loretta Nolan. She managed to hypnotize each of the ladies whose jewels were stolen and got them to reveal the precise locations of the family treasures.
And left them with no memory of having done so.
Precisely.
Astounding, Holmes.
Elementary, my dear Watson.
Excellent job. If we had been doing our best, we could have solved this one in 40 points. But we're not too far off, are we?
Well, Watson, will Alice see us now?
Not likely, Holmes. He's on assignment in Istanbul.
I understand that Wilfred Robards is considering taking Miss Nolan's case. He might be able to help you. If you'd like, I can arrange...
Well, the Clarendon murders look fairly open and shut, if you ask me. Not your typical murderers, I admit, but there you have it.
Why even trouble yourself with this one, Holmes?
You believe Francis Nolan to be guilty?
Guilty as a cat would swallow a canary.
And on what do you base that brilliant deduction?
Look, Frances Nolan claims not to have known that Clarendon was residing at Halliday's. Yet she proceeded directly to his room where she shot the bloke. She claims not to have owned a gun. Yet the gun found in her hand was purchased at Esgoff and the receipt had her name on it, for Christ's sake. No, that little lady will never see the light of day again.
You're quite sure the murder weapon was a small caliber pistol?
Quite. I'd also wager to say he'd been shot at very close range.
Ghastly.
Tell us, Sir Jasper, at what time did you receive the body?
Around 1 o'clock in the afternoon.
And how much time would you judge to have elapsed from the time of the murder?
Well, it's always difficult to be precise in these matters, but I'd venture to say he'd been dead anywhere from 4 to 10 hours.
I say, excuse me, Dr. Murray.
Hello, what?
Oh, my, I must have dozed off.
Ah, it's you, Whitson. And what are you doing with yourself this afternoon? Or is it evening already? Have I missed my tea?
It's Watson, sir. We're looking into the Clarendon case, and we were wondering...
Clarendon? Ah, I just finished that report when I dozed off. Let me see.
Number 301, I believe. Ah, yes. Here it is. Number 103. Clarendon, Guy. Not much, I'm afraid. A hole in the shirt where a small caliber bullet passed into the body. Extensive blood stains. Powder burns indicating a close range shot. Ah, here's something interesting. On the lower part of the shirt, I found traces of alcohol. Wine, to be exact. Now, I have a good nose for this sort of thing, and I believe it to be an inferior quality Italian red. Both Loretta Nolan and Guy Clarendon have had several complaints filed against them, although neither of them has ever been arrested. Both have been cited for public drunkenness. Likewise, both have been involved in some unusual pranks, but no one has ever pressed charges.
It appears as though Guy and Loretta, the terrible twins, will afflict us no more. Loretta must be desolate, what with the loss of a kindred spirit and fellow prankster.
Prankster?
Well, yes, my good fellow. I'll never forget the time Clarendon poured champagne down the front of Lady Leeds's new Paris gown for the sole purpose of Loretta's amusement.
I would think she must also be distraught at the loss of her lover, not to mention the imprisonment of her sister.
Well, I'm not sure about Loretta's feelings toward her sister, but I do know that Guy and Loretta were not lovers. Though outwardly they made an excellent couple, he, tall, handsome, and from a moneyed family, and she, beautiful, and an heiress in her own right. Yes, it would have been a match made in heaven. But it was a match made in far hotter regions, I suspect.
Francis claims that she and Clarendon were engaged to be married.
Well, that's hard to imagine him being who he is. Or was, as it were.
Why do you say that?
Well, Guy Clarendon was not at all a desirable sort. He'd all but been disowned by his own father for his compulsive gambling. The utter disregard for other people's money is probably what drew Clarendon and Loretta Nolan together in the first place. After all, she had managed to fritter away almost her entire fortune, unlike her sister Frances, who still had her inheritance, if not her honor, intact.
Oh, that explains it. What are you driving at, Holmes? From all I've heard of Clarendon, I suspect his interest in Frances was directed toward her sizable bank account.
It seems Sir Malcolm left his entire estate to his wife, Margaret. If she should precede him in death...
Or accompany him, as proved to be the case.
Yes. Then the estate was to be equally divided between his two daughters, Frances and Loretta. The estate included a 1/3 share in the Aberdeen Navigation Company.
Do you remember a woman who came in recently and purchased a derringer?
Oh, matter of fact, I do, sir. We don't get women in here very often, especially not alone. And I particularly remember that one because she was so pretty and, she looked like she really knew how to have a good time, if you'll pardon the expression.
Do you remember her name?
I should say I do. She repeated it twice whilst I was filling out the order form. Seems like it was very important to her that I get her name right. Let me see, it was, Frances, no, less, well, it was Frances something or other, sir.
Both Loretta Nolan and Guy Clarendon have had several complaints.
Who are you and what do you want?
Dr. John Watson, sir. I wondered if you might be kind enough to answer a few questions.
About what?
Guy Clarendon.
That welching little weasel, what about him?
He's been murdered.
Ah! I'd say he got what he deserved. And if you don't clear out of here in 2 seconds, so will you.
Oh, quite. Ta-ta.
My husband, God rest his soul, gave me that necklace for our 50th wedding anniversary. And woe betide the blighter that took it, I say.
I can certainly understand your consternation, madam. May I assume that you were out the evening it was taken?
Oh, yes, the house was completely empty. Sybil, my housekeeper, and I were attending the masked charity ball at St. Mary's for the benefit of unwed mothers. It wouldn't surprise me if that scoundrel was responsible in that direction as well. Society burglar, indeed. He's of the lower classes, mark my words.
Do you keep your jewels locked up?
Oh, I keep them in a very secret place. A box made to look like a copy of Great Expectations on the bookshelf amidst the other books. Hiram, my late husband, thought of that. But the thief went right to it.
My wife and I were guests at a small dinner party at the home of Otis Richmond. We arrived home sometime after midnight, and as my wife was putting away her finery, she noticed the bracelet was missing from her jewelry box, and we summoned the police immediately.
The servants were questioned?
Oh, they've all been with us for a number of years, and I haven't the slightest suspicion about them. But yes, the police did question them thoroughly. All were in bed asleep by the time we arrived home, and none heard anything untoward.
And nothing else was taken?
Surprisingly not.
Yet you are positive that the bracelet has not simply been misplaced?
No, my wife actually put it on while she was preparing for the evening, and then she decided against it. I saw her put it back in the box.
Where does she keep the box?
In her dressing table, there's a special compartment in the side of it. The box fits in rather neatly.
We were at a reception at Buckingham Palace for the new head of the China delegation. Upon arriving home, my wife discovered that her favourite ruby earrings were missing. We noticed nothing else out of place. No sign of a search, that is. And none of the servants had heard anything suspicious.
Tell us, Dr. Mason, have you determined the cause of Francis Nolan's blackouts?
It's the strangest thing, really. I examined her thoroughly and found nothing physically wrong. She could not recall receiving a bump in the head, nor did she complain of dizziness. All I could suggest was perhaps she was overtired and prescribed rest. It remains a complete mystery to me.
Tell us, who was at home on the evening of the 1st?
Well, just Miss Frances, sir. Oh, yes, of course, and Dr. Trevelyan.
At what time did the doctor take his leave?
Oh, let me think. It must have been 10 o'clock, because that's what time he always leaves.
What did Miss Frances do after her guest left?
What she does every evening, sir. Well, she asked for a cup of hot cocoa, which I brought her straight away. Then she read for a bit by the fire. Later, when I went up to bed, I passed her room, and the light went out.
What time would that have been?
Oh, let me see. Oh, I know, it was 11:30 because the clock chimed. Then I went to sleep. Later, I was awakened in the middle of the night, right in the midst of the most peculiar dream. You see, I was barefoot and trying to buy a pair of shoes.
As fascinating as all this is, could we get back to what it was that awakened you?
Oh, yes, of course. Well, it was something that I heard, or thought I heard. I listened for a bit, but that was the end of it, so I went to sleep again. Later, I awoke at 7:30. I always wake up at 7:30, except, of course, on Sundays when I sleep until 8. As usual, I began to prepare Miss Frances's breakfast. I had no sooner gotten to the kitchen when I heard the front door open and close. Well, I ran to the front window and peeked out, and there was Miss Frances walking down the street.
And why do you deem that so unusual?
Well, she never leaves before she's eaten one of my currant buns.
Enter and be recognized. Oh, you don't wish to play Her Majesty, eh? Very well.
You do not seem particularly disturbed by the recent turn of events, Miss Nolan.
Each of us grieves in his own way, Mr. Holmes.
It must be difficult for you to face the possibility that your own sister may have killed your dearest chum.
Guy was fun to be with. And as for Frances, I love her dearly, but, well, it's funny to think Miss Right and Proper has finally gotten herself into a bit of a jam.
Miss Nolan, may I ask, when was the last time you saw Guy Clarendon?
Let me think. I believe it was the Richmond's party last Thursday. Yes, I'm sure of it. God, we did cut it up a bit there.
And after the party?
We did not go home together, if that's what you're implying. That would have broken Frances's heart. She was head over heels for Guy, you know. She had some foolish notion that he was going to marry her. Not that someone like him ever would. But I do recall her saying, and it might have been the night of his death, that she was going to have a talk with him about their future.
Poor old Guy. He could be such fun. I'll never forget what a jolly good time we had the night he climbed the fountain at my country estate.
How acrobatic.
You don't know the half of it. It all started with Loretta. It seemed those things always did. Anyway, someone dared her to jump into the fountain. It being March and quite chilly, no one actually thought she would. She did them on better. She jumped straight in and swam to the center, where I have this absolutely dreadful sculpture of a lot of fat water nymphs. It rises some 20 or 30 feet in the air. She climbed it, though. The woman must be part monkey. Then she dove in. After that, it seemed to be the thing to do, so everybody took the plunge. Guy was the only other one who actually climbed to the top of the fountain, though. By the end of the weekend, half my guests came down with sneezes. Loretta caught pneumonia.
At first, I thought it must have been one of the servants. After all, there was no sign of a search, and nothing else was disturbed.
Did you question them?
Thoroughly, but none of them would admit a thing. It really wasn't until Hardinge and Bessie Durst were robbed, and the newspapers referred to us as victims of the society burglar, that I was certain it wasn't any of my staff. By the way, can you recommend a good housekeeper and valet?